Jagannatha Jaya, Baladeva Jaya, Subhadramaya. Jaya Gaudanitai Jaya Gaudanitai Jaya Gaudanitai Jaya Gaudanitai. Jaya Jaya Prabhupada 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 Jaya Jaya Prabhupada. Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahamsa Pravishara Stotra Sata Shri Srimad His Divine Grace Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai Gantra Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Jai Entai Gaur Premanande Hari Hari Bol. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 3, Chapter number 5, titled Vidura's Talks with Maitreya. Text number 30. Aham tatvad vikurvanan. Aham tatvad vikurvanan. Mano vaikarikad abut. Mano vaikarikad abut. Vaikarikascha ye deva. Vaikarikascha ye deva. Artha bhivyanjanam yata. Artha bhivyanjanam yata. Aham tatvad vikurvanan. Mano vaikarikad abut. Vaikarikascha ye deva. Artha bhivyanjanam yata. Aham tatvad vikurvanan. Mano vaikarikad abut. Vaikarikascha ye deva. Artha bhivyanjanam yata. Aham tatvad vikurvanan. Mano vaikarikad abut. Vaikarikascha ye deva. Artha bhivyanjanam yata. Word for word translation. Aham tatvat, from the principle of false ego. Vikurvanat, by transformation. Manaha, the mind. Vaikarikat, by interaction with the mode of goodness. Abut, generated. Vaikarikaha, by interaction with goodness. Cha, also. Ye, all these. Deva, demigods. Artha, the phenomenon. Abhivyanjanam, physical knowledge. Yataha, the source. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Translation. The false ego is transformed into mind by interaction with the mode of goodness. All the demigods who control the phenomenal world are also products of the same principle, namely the interaction of false ego and the mode of goodness. Purport. False ego interacting with the different modes of material nature, is the source of all materials in the phenomenal world. It's a short purport, so we go to the next text, text number 31. Tejasan indriyani eva jnana karma mayani cha. Is that it? Just two? Okay. I thought there was a misprint. Okay, it's just 2 lines. Translation. The senses are certainly products of the mode of passion in false ego, and therefore philosophical speculative knowledge and fruitive activities are predominantly products of the mode of passion. Purport. The chief function of the false ego is godlessness. When a person forgets his constitutional position as an eternally subordinate part and parcel of the Supreme Personality Godhead and wants to be happy independently, he functions mainly in 2 ways. He first attempts to act fruitively for personal gain or sense gratification, and after attempting such fruitive activities for a considerable time, when he is frustrated, he becomes a philosophical speculator and thinks himself to be on the same level as God. This false idea of becoming one with the Lord is the last snare of the illusory energy, which traps a living entity into the bondage of forgetfulness under the spell of false ego. The best means of liberation from the clutches of false ego is to give up the habit of philosophical speculation regarding the absolute truth. One should know definitely that the absolute truth is never realized by the philosophical speculations of the imperfect, egoistic person. The absolute truth of the Supreme Personality of Godhead is realized by hearing about Him in old submission and love from a bona fide authority, who is a representative of the 12 great authorities mentioned in the Srimad Bhagavatam. By such an attempt only can one conquer the illusory energy of the Lord, although for others she is unsurpassable, as confirmed in Bhagavad Gita 7.14. Om Ajnana Timirandasya Jnananjana Salakaya Chaksulmetam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasadi Gaur Bhaktarinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna. So thank you for tuning in to Srimad Bhagavatam today, Srimad Bhagavatam class. So we're continuing our discussion from the 5th chapter of Canto 3, titled Vidura's Talks with Maitreya. And the current section of verses, they're talking about the false ego and different products being produced from the false ego. So in text 30, the first text we read, we saw how the false ego, with the interaction of the mode of goodness, mind was produced, and along with the mind, the different demigods also they were produced. And then in the current text that we just read now, with the bigger purport, text 31, I'll read the translation again. The senses are certainly products of the mode of passion in false ego, and therefore philosophical speculative knowledge and fruitive activities are predominantly products of the mode of passion. So in 31, it's talking about how what false ego transforms into when it's combined with the mode of passion. So we're seeing how in this text it's talking about philosophical speculative knowledge, jnana, and fruitive activities, or karma. These are all products from the mode of passion. And today's purport, there's 2 paragraphs. And in the first paragraph, Prabhupada firstly is explaining how the main function of false ego is godlessness. And then Prabhupada, he goes on to define that false ego of a person can be divided into 2 sections. One is a karmi, another one is a jnani. So these are 2 ways in false ego can expand. So as we know, ego means identity. False ego means the false bodily conception of life, the false identity the soul thinks himself to be. So Prabhupada is explaining in the first paragraph that the false ego can function in 2 main ways. Firstly is to act fruitily for personal gain or sense gratification. So those are the karmis. And then the second way false ego can expand is when being frustrated with material enjoyment, when being frustrated with sense gratification, one becomes a philosophical speculator and then thinks himself to be on the same level as God. So these are two ways Prabhupada is saying false ego can expand. Then the second paragraph of today's purport, Prabhupada talks about how to get free from the clutches of this false ego, how to get liberation. So as we're hearing in the previous classes by different devotees, that the thing that is holding us, binding us to this material world, we're all spiritual in nature, but we're all bounded somehow or other to this material world, to matter. What is that thing that is binding us? The glue which is holding matter and spirit together, that's the false ego. So in the second part of the purport, Prabhupada talks about how to get liberation, how to overcome this false ego which is binding us to this material world. And the solution Prabhupada gives to overcome ahankar, to overcome false ego in the second paragraph is, I'll read the line where Prabhupada explains the solution. The absolute truth of the Supreme Personality Godhead is realized by hearing about Him in all submission and love from a bona fide authority, who is a representative of the 12 great authorities mentioned in the Srimad Bhagavatam. By such an attempt only can one conquer the illusory energy of the Lord, although for others she is unsurpassable, as confirmed in Bhagavad Gita 7.14. Devi esa gunamai mama maya durachaya ma meva ye prapajante maya metam tarantite. So Prabhupada quoting from Bhagavad Gita 7.14, he's saying that this illusory energy, Krishna himself is telling Arjuna that actually it's unsurpassable, no one can overcome it. It's so powerful, it's so strong. There's only one way you can overcome it, Arjuna, and that's by surrendering unto me. So surrendering unto Krishna means to engage in devotional service, and in this particular purport, Prabhupada is emphasizing submissively hearing about Krishna. How by submissively hearing about Krishna, one can overcome this false ego, which causes one to either act as a karmi or one to act as a jnani. And we're hearing in recent classes, for example, Kamsari Prabhu, he was giving the story of Sanatan Goswami when he goes to approach Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So that's one example of how submissive hearing, one can attain the real ego. One can overcome false ego and understand what one's real ego is, which is Jivera Swarupa Hoy, Krishnera Nichadas. So in this way, from that example, we can see how submissively hearing from a proper bona fide authority, one can overcome false ego. So false ego means false identity. So if you hear from a bona fide spiritual master, then if you hear submissively, then naturally the spiritual master will explain to you, okay, you're not the body, you're the soul. You know, there's Krishna, whom we all come from. We're all sons of Krishna. We're all servants of Krishna. Our duty in life is to surrender unto Him. Only then we'll be happy. So in this way, by submissively hearing from bona fide authorities, we can see how it helps us overcome all these false conceptions we have. Okay, I'm the enjoyer, I'm the master, I want to be the controller. All these things slowly will get purified, and we'll get to understand that how actually our real identity, Shri Shri Radha Gopinath Ki Jai, we'll understand that our real identity is that of being Krishna's servant. So this class, I'll mainly just focus on this one point of submissively hearing from the authority. What it means, what it exactly means to submissively hear, how to do it, the benefits, and different examples of devotees who exemplify this submissively hearing. So the ideal example we can take, the most simple one, is that of Arjuna in Bhagavad Gita. Obviously, we were talking about Sanatan Goswami, which Kamsari Prabhu was sharing a few days ago. That's another example from CC, how before he approaches Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he comes in a very humble mood, showing his submission. He keeps straw in his mouth, offers dandavats, and then offers himself in all humility that Nich Jati, Nich Sangi, Patita Dhamma, Kuvesai Kupapadi, Gunainu Janama, that my Jati is of very low born. I'm coming from a very low born family. Nich Sangi, my association was of the most degraded Muslims. Nich Jati, Nich Sangi, Patita Dhamma, I am the most fallen. I am the lowest of mankind. I've simply wasted my life in the deep dark well of mature existence. And in the next verse he says that I don't know what's good for me, I don't know what's bad for me. Yet people call me a great scholar, although I'm also thinking myself to be a great scholar. But actually I'm a fool, I don't know who I am, what am I supposed to do in this life. So in this way he offers himself in a very submissive, humble mood, and we see the same thing in Bhagavad Gita. Arjuna, he starts off by submitting himself to Krishna. Karponya doso pahata soba. In that verse he's humbly submitting himself to Krishna that, I'm trying to figure out how to solve this problem in my own endeavor, but I can't do it. So now I'm submitting myself to you. You please instruct me, and I'm a soul surrendered unto you. Please instruct me what to do. And then he submissively hears Krishna. Now, one thing Prabhupada explains in his purport, that to submissively hear doesn't mean you just blindly accept everything. In the third canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, in Lord Kapila's section, it's mentioned in Bhagavatam that doubting is a sign of intelligence. And Prabhupada, in the purport, he further elaborates on this, and he says that yes, it is good to have doubts. When one hears from the spiritual master and one has doubts, one should express it. Doubting is a sign of intelligence. Bhagavatam says, and Prabhupada further clarifies it also. But Prabhupada says that you can have doubts, you hear from spiritual master, you hear from bona fide authorities, you can have questions, you can have doubts about something you don't understand, and you can put forward those questions onto the spiritual master, onto the authority. But after your doubt has been answered, if you're still doubting, then that is not good. So we know the famous verse from the Shastras that Prabhupada always quote, Yasya deve para bhakti yatha deve tata guru tasyaita hi katitaryata prakashante mahatmana. So in this verse, Prabhupada would often quote in his purports. And Prabhupada will use this verse to exemplify what is the secret to advancing in spiritual life. So Yasya deve para bhakti yatha deve tata guru. Only unto that soul who has implicit faith in his spiritual master, in the words of his spiritual master, and in the words of Krishna. Only unto that soul is all the transcendental, confidential knowledge of devotional service of all the Shastras revealed in his heart. Shri Radha Gopinath ki jai. So Prabhupada will always quote this verse in his purports, exemplifying that one should have faith in the spiritual master. One shouldn't think that the spiritual master is an ordinary person. And Krishna, he himself instructs this to Uddhava in the 11th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. Acharya man vijaniya nava manyeta karichet sarva nam marcha buddhi suyeta sarva deva mayo guru. So Krishna, he himself is telling Uddhava that the Acharya, the spiritual master, he shouldn't be considered an ordinary person. And thinking of him an ordinary person, one shouldn't be envious of him. Instead, one should understand him to be the representative of all the demigods, and one should serve him. So Prabhupada is saying in third canto that yes, it's good to have doubts, it's good to have questions. In fact, this means that you're intelligent. This is a sign of intelligence. And Prabhupada and other purports will explain, we shouldn't just blindly follow. We should ask questions. We should get our doubts cleared. That's a sign of intelligence, and that's needed. But after we put forward our questions, after we put forward our doubts, and after these doubts have been answered, to still have doubts, then that's not good, Prabhupada says. Why? Because then you're not showing your faith to the spiritual master. And then that's when the other verse comes in. Yasya deve para bhakti yatha deve tata guru. That only unto that person who has faith in the words of Guru and Krishna, only unto him is all the imports, the secrets of the Shastras revealed from within his heart. So that's how we see in Bhagavad Gita. It's not that, okay, Arjuna humbly comes, surrenders unto Krishna. Okay, Krishna, I'm a fool. I tried to figure this out on my own. I couldn't figure it out. Now I'm surrendering to you. Now I'm a soul surrendering to you. Please instruct me what to do. It's not that, okay, then Arjuna just sat back and just listened for the whole Bhagavad Gita. And then, okay, Arjuna's problem was solved. No. Right from the start of Bhagavad Gita, Arjuna is putting forward different questions and different doubts. Right at the start of third chapter, Arjuna starts asking, not even third chapter, even in second chapter, he asks questions about, okay, you talked about a self-realized person, a sthita digmuri. How does he sit? How does he walk? How does he, engage himself? And then Krishna answers. Then in third chapter, again, he puts forward another doubt, that you've told me to do Buddha yoga, and according to Arjuna's conception, he thinks Buddha yoga actually means bhakti yoga. But according to Arjuna's misconception, he thinks Buddhi Yoga means to go to the forest, because Buddhi means intelligence or jnana. So he's thinking, okay, when Krishna is telling me to do Buddhi Yoga, he's telling me to do jnana, go to the forest and renounce everything. But at the same time, Krishna is also telling me, get up and fight. What are you doing? So these two things are contradictory. On one hand, Krishna is saying, do Buddhi Yoga, go to the forest. On the other hand, he's saying, get up and fight. So it seems like contradictory. So that's why in the start of 3rd chapter, he will ask this question. Now on one hand, you're asking me to engage in Buddhi Yoga. On the other hand, you're asking me to get up and fight. These two things seem equivocal to me. Can you please clear this doubt? So in this way, throughout the whole Bhagavad Gita, Arjuna will ask different questions, different doubts. And this doubting, as the Bhagavatam explained, is actually good. It's good to have questions. It's good to get the questions cleared. But also these questions should be, there's a proper mood and etiquette in which these questions should be put forward. We can ask questions, but again, that questions should be in a submissive spirit. And Krishna, he himself explains in the 4th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, Tadvidi pranipatena pari prashnena sevaya. So pari prashneya means, Prabhupada translates as submissively inquiring. So again, Prabhupada in the word for translate, he's not just saying inquiring, because one can challengingly inquire, one can inquire in the spirit of putting the other person down, or to show how great he is, or how intelligent he is. But no, Prabhupada translates pari prasneya as submissively inquiring. So that's what Arjuna is doing throughout the whole Bhagavad Gita. He's asking a lot of questions, many questions through so many chapters, but every single question of his is asked in the proper mood and spirit, in a submissive attitude. And we see this especially in the 4th chapter of Bhagavad Gita. At the start of the 4th chapter, Krishna, he tells Arjuna about how he first imparted this transcendental knowledge to the sun god Vivaswan. Imam vivasvate yogam, bhoktavan aham avyayam, vivaswan manave praha, manur iksha kave bravit. So when Arjuna hears this, that many millions of years ago, Krishna, he gave this transcendental knowledge to sun god Vivaswan, then Vivaswan gave it to Manu, then Manu gave it to Ikshvaku. So Arjuna is thinking, this happened, many millions of years ago. How is this? Me and Krishna, we're just like cousins. We were born together around the same time. How can Krishna have spoken this transcendental knowledge to the sun god millions and millions of years ago? So then Arjuna, he puts forward his question. And importantly, thing to note in the question Arjuna asks is how he asks this question. He doesn't just say, oh Krishna, how is this that you spoke to the sun god? You're just my contemporary sun god, happened like millions of years ago. It doesn't make sense to me. He doesn't just, like how we would talk, very rashly or abruptly. He doesn't just talk like that. But he very carefully frames this question in a very submissive spirit. And if you look at that verse, aparam bhavato janma param janma vivasvate. So in that verse, Arjuna katam etadhi vijjaniyam. That's the 3rd line of that verse. So if you study that verse, you'll see how very carefully Arjuna is framing his question in a very submissive way, in a way not to put forward any negative feelings, or to show that he is still the surrendered disciple and he just wants to understand more clearly. So firstly, Arjuna is saying that Krishna, the sun god, is very much senior to you by birth. So how am I to understand? So that's the 3rd line. Katam etadhi vijjaniyam. How am I to understand that, which when he's saying that, he is making it clear that, okay, you said that you spoke this to the sun god many millions of years ago. Okay, I accept that as truth, because I know you're not lying to me, you're my spiritual master. Whatever you said is right. I have no doubts regarding your statement. Whatever you said is right. But how am I supposed to understand this? It doesn't make sense, because according to my understanding, me and you are contemporaries. So how could you have spoken something millions of years ago? Can you please help me understand this thing which is seeming to be contradicting to me? So if we study that verse, we can see how very carefully Arjuna is framing the question to Krishna. So in the same way, we need to be also careful when we're hearing from our spiritual master or authorities. We can no doubt offer questions and doubts, but taking example from Arjuna, we should be mindful of the attitude in which we're asking the questions, and we should be mindful of how we're putting forward that question. That question that we ask, it shouldn't sound challenging or shouldn't give the impression that we're doubting what the authority is saying, that we're doubting what our spiritual master is saying. So we shouldn't give that impression to the other person. And why is this important? Why is it important to maintain this mood of humility when we're hearing? Why is this important to maintain this mood of submissive hearing? In the first canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, first chapter, it's explained the benefit of hearing submissively, the benefit of showing submissiveness in hearing from the authority. The sages on Namansharana, in the first chapter of Bhagavatam, they're engaged in the fire sacrifice. And they want to hear Srimad Bhagavatam. And there's many great sages there to speak, but they select Sutta Goswami to speak Srimad Bhagavatam. They select Sutta Goswami to sit on the Vyasasana and speak to them about the glories of Krishna Katha and to answer all the questions and doubts. And when they select Sutta Goswami, they give different reasons of why we're selecting you. In one verse, I think it's 7th or 8th verse of that first chapter of Srimad Bhagavatam, they tell Sutta Goswami, we are selecting you because of your submissiveness to your spiritual masters. And the sages in Namansharana, they explain, because Sutta Goswami, because you were so submissive unto your spiritual story, into your spiritual masters, your spiritual authorities, you have been blessed with all of the choicest blessings of all of your senior authorities. So in the purport of this verse, Prabhupada explains that this is the benefit of being a submissive devotee, of a devotee of the Lord. When one exemplifies this mood of submission, one exemplifies this mood of submissively hearing from the spiritual master, what is the benefit one gets? One gets all the blessings of that person. Because by showing submission, we're showing surrender. So naturally, we can take it with ourselves. If someone is coming to us in a very humble mood, very submissive, following whatever we're doing, hearing very attentively, someone is very surrendered to us and, very attentive to all the details. If someone is so sold out to hearing from us, then naturally, our heart would melt seeing this person. This person is so humble, he's so surrendered. Whatever I saying, he's doing it, he's so sincere, he's so submissive. Then seeing their attitude of surrender, our heart will completely melt and, whatever, all good feelings from our heart will come towards that person. And when Krishna, he notices that, he gives all blessings unto that person. So this is what happens when one submissively hears, when one shows this mood of submissiveness or humility in hearing, that one is endowed with all the blessings of that devotee who he is hearing from. And Krishna being pleased, as we sing every day in the morning, Yasya prasadat bhagavat prasado. By pleasing the devotee of the Lord, one pleases Krishna. So not only does one get endowed with all the blessings of the devotee, but also one gets endowed or spiritually empowered with the blessings of Krishna. So this is the benefit of hearing from the authority with submission. And also at the end of so this is how Arjuna, he was hearing the whole of Bhagavad Gita. He was hearing in a very humble, submissive spirit. He was putting forward questions, but at the same time, after his questions were answered, he wasn't doubting Krishna's words. He was completely accepting whatever Krishna was telling him. And because of that faith, Arjuna is glorified. For example, in the 10th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, where Arjuna is famously saying, Param Brahma, Param Dhama, Pavitam Paramam Bhamam. So after those famous slokas, Arjuna is then saying that Sarvam Etam Ritam Manye, that Krishna, whatever you've told me, I completely accept whatever you told me. And it's explained by the Acharyas, that is at this junction, actually, Arjuna's illusion is gone. Arjuna is fully self-realized at this junction in chapter 10. It's not that only at the end of Bhagavad Gita in chapter 18 that Arjuna's doubts are cleared. No. At this point, when Arjuna is saying Param Brahma, Param Dhamma, and then this verse where Arjuna is saying that Krishna, I completely accept whatever you've told me. That I don't have any doubts, my doubts are all clear. At this point, Arjuna actually has understood the whole of Bhagavad Gita. But then one would ask, why is there the other chapters of Bhagavad Gita? The other chapters, which expand from further question Arjuna, Arjuna is asking for the benefit of others. So Arjuna, he's showing this humble, submissive mood, and the result of that, Arjuna, he himself explains at the end of Bhagavad Gita. Okay, at the start he had doubts, he wasn't confused, he surrendered unto Krishna, he humbly heard from Krishna in submission, he asked questions, he got his question cleared, and what was the end result? Nasta moha smriti labdha tat prasadan maya chitta stito asmi gata sandeha karise vachanam tava. So Arjuna, he himself is telling the benefit of what happens when one submissively hears from authority. That nasta moha, whatever illusions, whatever doubts we have, will all go away. Then smriti labdha, that now my memory of all the spiritual instructions that I had gathered is regained. So all of us, when we study Shastras, when we hear lectures, we gather different spiritual instructions, spiritual information, and that gets all stored in the smriti. But what happens, as Krishna explains in the 2nd chapter of Bhagavad Gita, that when one gets overcome by lust, dhayato visayan pumsa, sangaste supajayate, how does he go next? Sangat sanjayate kama, kama krodha bijayate. So by lust one develops attachment, by attachment, when attachment is frustrated, one gets overcome by anger, and when one gets overcome by anger, then the smriti gets lost. Smriti brahmsat buddhi naso. So that smriti, when memory is lost, then all the spiritual instructions that we've gathered in hearing Bhagavatam, in reading Bhagavatam, that's all stored in our memory. But when one gets overcome by lust, attachment and anger, all that spiritual knowledge, it all goes away. It's not accessible to us anymore because the memory of that gets overpowered by attachment and anger. But if we're submissively hearing constantly, then Arjuna is saying that smriti gets regained back. In the end of Bhagavad Gita, he's saying that yes, I was an illusion, but because I heard from you submissively, my illusion is gone, nasta moha. Then second benefit is saying smriti labdha. Now all that spiritual instructions which I had studied in Gurukul, so it's not that only Brahmanas they study in Gurukul got knowledge of Shastras, but it's mentioned the Vaishyas, Kshatras, Brahmanas. All three of them, they used to go to Gurukul, all three of them would have knowledge of the Shastras. So no doubt Arjuna had knowledge of the Shastras. He's not the body, he's not the soul, he shouldn't have bodily attachment. But when he got overcome by bodily attachment, all that smriti, all that memory of those Shastric instructions was all gone away and he couldn't access that knowledge. But by hearing from authority, again, submissively, he regained his memory of those spiritual instructions. That's why it's important to constantly hear, because the nature of this material world is forgetfulness. The power of forgetfulness is so strong. That's why it's mentioned, Nityam Bhagavatasaya, that every day we should daily hear Srimad Bhagavatam. Because we'll hear something, we'll read something, okay, we remember, we'll apply it in our life, but the power of Maya is so strong that we'll forget over time. That's why we have to daily, constantly hear again and again. If we're constantly hearing again and again, then that smriti, where all the spiritual instruction is stored, will never go away. It'll always be there. We might get lose that, temporarily being overcome by attachment, lust, greed, or anger, but because we're constantly hearing every day, because we're in a daily routine of hearing Bhagavatam and daily routine in reading Bhagavatam, then naturally we'll check ourselves and we'll come back to ground, back onto the path of bhakti. So in this way Arjuna is he himself is giving first-hand experience of the benefits he's experiencing by submissively hearing from Krishna. So nasta moha smriti labdha trat prasadan mayachuta. And he's giving Krishna credit. He's offering gratitude that Krishna, this is all happening because of you. Tvat prasadan mayachuta. Prasad means mercy. Because of your mercy, because of the merciful instructions you've given me, I am now free from illusions, I am free from all doubts, my memory is back. And stito asmi gata sandeha. Stito asmi gata sandeha means, now I'm ready. Now I'm very firmly and fixed up in devotional service. So this is another benefit. If we're constantly hearing, then we'll be very fixed up and determined in spiritual life. We'll get the inspiration to practice. If we're not hearing, then material desires will creep in, and slowly our enthusiasm, our determination to perform bhakti will slowly go down. But if we're daily, constantly hearing and reading Srimad Bhagavatam, if we have some kind of regulated sadhana practice of daily hearing and reading, then naturally every day we'll be getting inspiration to practice bhakti, and the enthusiasm, the determination will always be there to practice bhakti. So in this way Arjuna, he himself is explaining this. And also in that verse that we were just discussing, the second line in which Arjuna is offering his gratitude to Krishna, that Krishna, all of this was possible because I heard from you, this is all your mercy, your prasad, this is all your mercy, this is all happening to me. So also it's important as submissive hearers of Bhagavatam or Krishna Katha, that one has gratitude to who he is hearing from. So Radhashyam Prabhu, he gives this instruction of how one should hear. He says whenever we're hearing Krishna Katha from anyone, we should have 4 things in our consciousness when we hear. And if we have these 4 things, then we can properly benefit from hearing that Krishna Katha. So it's called raga. So each letter of the word represents something. One is respect, appreciation, gratitude, and affection. So if we hear with respect for the speaker, that, okay, this person has taken his time to speak Krishna Katha, he's prepared, he's given his time to prepare and is sharing this, and because of him I'm benefiting. So one needs to have some respect for the speaker. Affection, one needs to obviously have some kind of friendly affection that this person, he's such a nice devotee, he's in good standing, and he's taking his time out to speak. And gratitude, which we sing from Arjuna, he himself, he's giving Krishna credit. That, okay, my illusion is gone, nastamoha, smriti labda, my memory is back, stito asmi gata sandeha, that, okay, now I'm determined to fight. How is this all happening? It's all happening by Chat Prasadan Mayachita. It's all happening by your mercy. So he's having that gratitude. So when we're hearing from anyone, we should have gratitude to the speaker and appreciation. So if we having these feelings in our heart when we're hearing Bhagavatam, Krishna Katha, Radhashyam Prabhu explains, then that message will enter into our hearts. So there's different levels in which one can hear Bhagavatam. So submissively hearing doesn't mean just, externally hearing, but it's also dependent on our consciousness. Based on where our consciousness is, to that degree, the message of Krishna Katha will enter into our heart. For example, we can take it, okay, there's different devotees sitting in class. Some will hear, but nothing will go in. They'll just hear, but their mind will be elsewhere. So the message will just come in through one ear and just go out the other end. After class, they won't remember anything, they won't take anything. They're spacing on class, or their mind is going here and there. So that's one level of listeners. Still, they get some benefit from sitting in class, so they'll get some benefit, but not the most benefit that one could possibly get. Then, higher than them, you could take, okay, someone hears attentively, his mind is not wandering, he's hearing attentively, and he's hearing and he's, okay, accepting it. But after he leaves the class, he doesn't meditate on what he's heard, he doesn't contemplate on it, and he doesn't apply it in his life. And the third type of devotee, which is said to be the ideal hearer of Krishna Katha, is one who hears attentively, but after hearing attentively, after the class is over, he tries to meditate on at least something that is said in class. And he tries to contemplate on it, and then not only that, he tries to apply it in his life. So this is said to be the ideal submissive hearer of Srimad Bhagavatam, ideal submissive hearer of Krishna Katha. Is one who doesn't just theoretically just hear, but also he takes into his heart, he contemplates, okay, what was being said today? Okay, today we read this section of Bhagavatam. Okay, what was Vidura saying? What was Maitreya saying? What was Prabhupada saying? Is Prabhupada, okay, Prabhupada was saying this, okay, how can I apply this in my life? How can I take this into my heart? And then when he practically applies in his life, okay, he is said to be the most ideal, topmost hearer of Bhagavatam, the most ideal hearer of Krishna Katha. So in this way, we can understand that how this power of submissive hearing is very powerful, and it's a matter of consciousness also. Also in Chaitanya Charitamrita, in Adi Leela, in the first volume of CC, in one purport, Prabhupada explains, Prabhupada is talking about the Paramatma in one's heart, and Prabhupada is saying that one can see Krishna face to face by just one quality. And what is that quality? Prabhupada explains, submissiveness. So this Prabhupada is saying right in the first volume of Chaitanya Charitamrita, that simply by this one quality of submissiveness, one can see the Lord face to face. And then in the second line of this purport, Prabhupada is saying that to the degree one is submissive, to that proportion one will advance in spiritual life. To that proportion one will get closer to seeing Krishna face to face. So it's a very nice purport. When I read that, I was like, wow, it's pretty powerful. Prabhupada is highlighting the same quality of submissiveness. Why submissiveness? Submissiveness you can take it as another synonym for surrender. So the idea of surrender is coming up again and again through all the Shastras. Prabhupada will again and again emphasize, okay, we need to surrender unto Krishna, we need to surrender unto Guru, we have to surrender unto Krishna's instructions, we have to surrender unto Guru's instructions. How do we show that surrender? By the quality of submission. Submissiveness and surrender, they go together. They're both the same thing. If one is submissive, one is just following whatever Krishna says, one is just following whatever the spiritual master is saying, then that's showing his surrender. So in this way, Prabhupada explains that to the degree we are submissive, to that proportion we will advance in spiritual life. So we talked about Arjuna as the one example of ideal submissive hero, Srimad Bhagavatam. Now, what about on the other side? What happens when one doesn't submissively hear from the authority? So example of this is again given in Chaitanya Charitamrita and Adi Leela. So in the section of CC which describes the different branches of the Chaitanya tree. So there's the tree of devotional service, and Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he's like the main trunk, and from him are coming many different branches. And from these different branches, many sub-branches are also coming. So the main branches of the tree of devotional service, obviously one is Nityananda Prabhu, then another main branch is Advaita Acharya, Gadadhar Pandit, Srivas Thakur. Then from again each one of these major branches, there's many sub-branches. The disciples of Nityananda Prabhu, the associates of Nityananda Prabhu, and their disciples. So in this way, the tree of devotional service expands and takes over the whole universe. So in the chapter which is describing the branches of Lord Advaita Acharya, in that chapter it's given. So in each chapter they will first explain what are the main sub-branches of this personality. So in this chapter, which is talking about Advaita Acharya's sub-branches or his associates, it's given in CC that with Advaita Acharya he had many sons. Some of his sons, they followed his instructions strictly and they continued on. The tree of devotion was expanded. But some of the sons of Advaita Acharya, they deviated. They didn't follow his instructions and they fell away from the path of devotional service. And in this section, Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami, he says, Acharyera mata e mata sara, tara agna langi mate, say asara. So in this verse, Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami, he's saying that Acharyera mata, that the instruction of the Acharya, the instructions he's giving, e mata sara. Sara means is the essence. So the instructions of the spiritual master on the authority is the essence or the guiding principle of spiritual life. And Tandra Agna Langi Chale, Agna means instruction. So if someone doesn't follow the instructions of the Acharya, then what happens to him? Asar, he becomes simply useless, good for nothing. And Prabhupada in the purport, he gives the example of his own life story. Prabhupada is saying, I simply strictly follow the instructions of my spiritual master, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, and now look at the result. I am so successful, all around the world there's devotees of Krishna. On the other hand, Prabhupada is quoting his god brothers, that my spiritual master, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, he instructed all of us that there shouldn't be, we should form a GBC, a governing body commission for the Gaudiya Math. Not one person should come up and take over. But my god brothers, they didn't follow this instruction, and because they didn't follow the instruction of my spiritual master, look at them now. They've all become asar. They've all become useless. What preaching are they doing? What potency do they have? So this is what happens when one doesn't submissively follow the instructions of the authority or the spiritual master. One becomes useless. And further, in another purport in this section, Prabhupada, he more graphically explains of what actually happens to such a person. And he uses the tree example. Prabhupada says, when someone is not submissively hearing from his spiritual master or his spiritual authority, what happens to him? That, okay, you have the tree of devotional service, and then there's the main branch, and from the main branch there's sub-branches. So we're situated somewhere on that tree of devotional service. And Prabhupada is saying that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he's personally the gardener, and he's personally watering this tree of devotional service. And whoever is connected with this tree of a devotional service, they're getting the water. And they're getting nourished by the water which Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he himself, is pouring onto that tree of devotional service. But if someone is not hearing submissively from his spiritual master, from his authority who's on this tree of devotional service, then what happens to that person? The water which Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is pouring, the mercy of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu doesn't come to him. And what happens if water doesn't come to a branch? Slowly, slowly that branch will become more and more dry if water doesn't come to that branch. And becoming more and more dry, what happens to a branch? It will become so brittle, it becomes so dry, that at one point of time, the branch will just break up and fall from the tree. So in this way, Prabhupada explains, this is what happens to one who doesn't follow the instructions of his spiritual master. And that slowly, slowly over time, he'll become more and dry. The mercy of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu won't come to him. The mercy of the acharyas, like we see with our Guru Parampara, the mercy of the whole Guru Parampara, the mercy of Mahaprabhu, Nityananda Prabhu won't come down to the disciplic succession, and he'll become more and more dried up until a point will come, he'll become so dry, he'll just break up, and he'll fall away from the tree of devotional service. So this is how Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami Prabhupada warns us in Chaitanya Charitamrita. And coming back to the purport, the first half of the purport, Prabhupada is explaining how false ego gets diverted into two ways. One is that it can make you act as a karmi, and the other is it can make you act as a jnani. And Prabhupada, as we're explaining in the second purport, says that you can overcome this simply by submissively hearing from a spiritual master coming in disciplic succession. You can overcome this false ego which makes one act as a karmi in fruitive path or the mental speculative path. So throughout the whole Bhagavatam there's numerous examples of devotees who were on the path of either karma or jnana, but they submissively heard Krishna Katha from a devotee and they were able to overcome. Just yesterday I was listening to one class by Radhashyam Prabhu, and he was explaining in the class that the beauty of Srimad Bhagavatam is that not only does it tell you stories of pure devotees of the Lord, but it tells you, majority of Bhagavatam, you get so many stories of persons who actually did a lot of mistakes in their life. But after doing a mistake, they took to the path of bhakti and they got liberated and they went back to the spiritual world. And Prabhu was mentioning this point, if Bhagavatam only talked about pure devotees like Prahlad Maharaj, who right from birth they were a pure devotee, they didn't make any mistake, they were just completely pure. If every single chapter of Bhagavatam is only talking about pure devotees of Lord, then we wouldn't be able to connect so much with it. And we would lose hope. Okay, this is all Nityasiddha devotees descending from spiritual. What about me? You know, I have this anartha, I have that anartha, I am struggling through this in life, I'm struggling through that in life. You know, where's the hope for me? In this way, one will lose hope. So therefore, Radhashyam Prabhu is saying, that's why Bhagavatam, along with giving examples of pure devotees of Lord, like Prahlad Maharaj, it also gives examples of many, many different devotees, having different anarthas, having different problems in their life. But the beauty is, no matter whatever anartha they had, no matter whatever problem they had in life, they took to the path of bhakti and they were able to overcome it and purify themselves and go back home, back to Godhead. For example, we have Dhruva Maharaj. He wasn't pure at the start. What was his anartha? Initially, he was, because of the Kshatriya spirit, he was raging with the fire of revenge. So to have this fire of revenge is anartha. And all of us also go through this anartha sometimes. But he was able to overcome it. How? By submissively hearing from his mother, Suniti. So when he comes to his mother crying in rage, being insulted by his stepmother, he submissively hears from his mother Suniti. What does Suniti instruct? The first thing she tells him, my dear child, no matter what you do, don't think anything bad for your stepmother. So that's the first instruction Suniti gives to her son Dhruva Maharaj. Don't think anything bad for your mother. Because when you think something bad for her, that thought, that negative emotion will come to hurt you yourself. And Dhruva Maharaj, he followed this. But still he had this ambition to get a kingdom greater than that of his great-grandfather, greater than that of Brahma himself. So that again is another anartha, that again is another material desire, of desiring material opulence. But still, Dhruva Maharaj was able to overcome that material desire. How? By submissively hearing, again, first he submissively heard from his mother, then he submissively heard from Narad Muni himself. And Prabhupada explains in his purports that the reason for Dhruva Maharaj's success, how was it that Dhruva Maharaj in such a short time, in just 6 months, he was able to see Vishnu face to face. The reason for Dhruva Maharaj's success is that he strictly followed whatever his spiritual master told him. So again, through Bhagavatam, Prabhupada will again emphasize this point. The secret to spiritual life is just this, that you submissively hear from your Guru Maharaj and you just strictly follow his instructions. That is the surest, most quickest way to advance in spiritual life. So that's one example we see in Bhagavatam, Dhruva Maharaj. Also later on, again, Dhruva Maharaj is overcome by another Anatha. Later on, in the fight with the Yakshas, Dhruva Maharaj, he is overcome by anger. So all these different Anathas that we all have, like anger, desire for great wealth, opulence, desire to get revenge, all these Anathas we're seeing in Bhagavatam through different characters, like we're seeing with Dhruva Maharaj. But how are they able to overcome it? By taking to the path of bhakti. So in this way, Radhashyam Prabhu is explaining that through these, with the case of Dhruva Maharaj, later on when he gets overcome by anger and he's just mercilessly killing all the yakshas, again, Swayambhu Manu comes, and again Dhruva Maharaj, he submissively hears instructions of Swayambhu Manu, and then he overcomes his anger. So in this way, there's so many examples throughout the Bhagavatam of different persons going through a certain anatha, but they are able to overcome the anatha by taking to bhakti. So in this way, Bhagavatam glorifies bhakti. That just look, no matter what background you come, no matter what anatha you have, no matter what mature desire you have, you just simply take to bhakti, bhakti will purify you. No matter where you're coming from, what problem you have, bhakti will purify you, you'll go back home, back to Godhead. Even you take, for example, Maharaj Rahuguna. What anatha did he do? He offended a Vaishnava. So Bhagavatam even gives examples of persons who commit Vaishnava aparad. Like Maharaj Rahuguna, he offended the lotus feet of Jada Bharat. But still, he overcome it. How? By submitting to Jada Bharat, hearing from him submissively, then he purified himself, took bhakti. Sobari Rishi, he also committed Vaishnava aparad. He also offended the lotus feet of Garuda. And then later on, he got overcome by lust. So, but still, again, how does Sobari Manu's story end? Later on, he takes to path of bhakti, he gets liberated, he goes back home, back to spiritual world. So in this way, Radhashyam Prabhu explains that if you look throughout the Bhagavatam, there's just numerous examples of different devotees having different anathas, different problems. The problem of Vaishnava pride, problem of lust, anger, greed, desire for opulence, wealth, pride. Whatever anathas we're all going through in our day-to-day life, ordinary conditions all have, all those anathas are shown in Bhagavatam, the different characters. But the beauty is, they take to a path of bhakti, they purify themselves, and they go back home, back to Godhead. So in this way, the glories of bhakti yoga is exemplified. Just see how powerful bhakti yoga is. No matter who you are, what background you come, demon body, this body, no matter what sins you performed, like Ajamil, so many sins he performed, Mrigari, so many sins he performed, but look, they took to the path of bhakti, they got purified and went back home, back to Godhead. So in this way, bhakti, along with the first process of Shravanam, submissive hearing, is glorified throughout Bhagavatam. Okay, we'll stop here. Is there any questions or comments? Yes, sir.
Just regarding over, it's mentioned when Rahula offended Jadabhar, he submissively heard from him and took him as a spiritual master and took forgiveness. We also hear in the case of Durvasani, to nullify the offense, he prayed obeisance to and begged forgiveness from the Vishnu. But with Saubhari Muni, is there such a case where he then again begged forgiveness from Garuda? Because it's mentioned that after some years of enjoyment, then he took to devotion, so we don't hear much about it.
Yes, I also haven't read of him going later to like physically offer obeisance to Garuda. But you can take it that, okay, he offended him and he got the reaction for that. Because from Garuda's side, he didn't hold any grudge. So Krishna took that into account also, that pure devotees, although someone does something bad to them, they don't take that, to heart, okay, and they don't hold that revenge kind of mood. So Garuda, from his side, he didn't hold anything bad towards Saubhari Muni. But Krishna, although he knew that Garuda, he himself wasn't hurt so much, he himself was detached, being a pure devotee of the Lord, Krishna still, he wanted to still punish Saubhari Muni, to give some reaction. So that's why he later on fell down, by seeing the fish copulating. But then, after undergoing the reaction of that Vaishnava pride, okay, then he purified himself with bhakti yoga, then he went back home to the spiritual world. So, yes, there is a consequence of Vaishnava pride, and that consequence will come if one doesn't submit. So, you can take it, okay, because he didn't physically go and offer dandavats to Garuda, he had to go through that fall down. Whereas Maharaj Raguna, immediately when he realized, okay, this person is a great devotee, he immediately submitted. So he didn't get any, great karmic reaction. Whereas for Sobari Muni, because he didn't realize his mistake and he didn't offer obeisance to Garuda, he had to go through that reaction for that Vaishnava pride. And after going through a reaction, okay, then Krishna let him go. Then he took Par Bhakti and he got liberated. So it's not like you're doomed forever. You'll go through some difficulty in your life due to that offense, but after undergoing those difficulties, then if you take the Bhakti, then you can go. But if you want to avoid that reaction of Vaishnava pride, then, okay, you offer dandavats. And we see that with Raghugara Maharaj. The moment he realized that, okay, this person is no ordinary person, he's a great devotee, he just became so fearful, and immediately offered obeisances to Maharaj Raghunatha. So then he didn't have to go through any punishment for that. Okay, we'll stop here. Gantra Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, Raghu Prabhupada ki jai.